Real-life horror stories that will haunt your every move. Be advised, it's so terrifying that 90% of people couldn't last more than 30 minutes before shutting it off. Consider this your only warning.
The Thing in the Cattle Farm. Part 1. The First Dead Cow. The first cow didn't look killed. It looked placed. That was what bothered me. If you've ever worked a ranch, you know what a predator kill looks like. Coyotes tear at the hind legs first, mountain lions go for the throat and drag the body. Even feral dogs leave chaos behind, dirt torn up, fencing bent, something frantic in the scene. This wasn't that. The cow was lying on her side in the center of the north pasture, legs folded neatly under her like she'd lowered herself to rest. Except her eyes were open, and her chest was empty. Not ripped open, not shredded, empty. The hide along her rib cage had split in a clean vertical seam, as if someone had unzipped her from sternum to belly. The ribs were visible. No organs, no blood pooling in the grass. Just dark hollowness where there should have been weight. The ground beneath her was dry. I remember kneeling down and touching the grass. No saturation, no mud, no struggle. Just a dead animal set carefully into the field like an offering. My name is Caleb Turner. My family has owned Turner Ranch for 3 generations. We run close to 400 head of cattle across 800 acres of flat Texas land. Nothing like that had ever happened here. I stood there for a long time staring at that seam. It wasn't torn. It wasn't bitten. It was clean. Too clean. I called my brother, Luke. He thought I was exaggerating until he saw it himself. He crouched beside me and swore under his breath. Some sick bastard did this. Why no blood? I asked. He didn't answer. We checked the fence line. No breaks, no tire tracks cutting through the pasture, no footprints in the damp soil from last night's brief rain. Nothing. The cow was simply there. Opened. Hollow. By noon we had 3 more. All in different sections of the property. All placed. All emptied. One near the old windmill. One by the creek. One directly outside the barn doors. That one bothered me the most, because it meant whatever did this had walked close. Very close. We called the sheriff. He walked the fields, hat low over his eyes, chewing slowly like he was trying to process something sour. Cold stuff? Luke suggested. The sheriff shook his head. No tire tracks, no footprints, no drag marks. He nudged one of the bodies with his boot. The cavity inside was dry. Too dry. No scavengers either, he muttered. That was true. Normally.
Buzzards circle within hours. Nothing circled above us. The sky was empty. That night, the dogs wouldn't leave the porch. We have 2 Great Pyrenees that patrol the property. They're not timid animals. They've taken down coyotes before. But around midnight, they pressed themselves against the front door, whining low in their throats, not barking, not growling, just whining, like something was out there that didn't operate under normal rules. Luke grabbed the rifle. I grabbed the floodlight. We stepped off the porch into the dark. The fields stretched flat and silent under a thin moon. No wind, no insects, no cattle movement. That was wrong. Cattle shift at night. You hear hooves, low grunts, something. But the pasture was silent. Dead silent. Then we heard it. A sound from the north pasture. Wet. Not loud. Not animal. Like something heavy being set down. Carefully. Deliberately. We ran. The floodlight beam cut through the dark, shaking with my hands, and we saw it. Not clearly, but enough. A shape standing between the cattle. Too tall, too narrow. Its outline wasn't solid. It seemed stretched, like a man pulled too thin. The cows weren't running. They weren't even moving. They were standing in a loose circle around it. Still, like statues. The shape bent forward slowly, and one cow folded at the knees. No struggle, No sound. Just folded. The shape lowered over it. The floodlight flickered. Not died. Flickered. The air felt wrong. Thick. Like pressure building in my ears. "Shoot it," Luke yelled. I couldn't. Because I couldn't find something solid to aim at. It didn't move like a body. It moved like a shadow that had learned how to stand. Luke fired anyway. The rifle cracked through the silence. The cattle scattered instantly. The shape straightened, turned, and for one fraction of a second, the light hit something that should have been a face. There were no features, just an indentation where eyes should be, and a vertical split down the center of its torso, mirroring the cow's. Then it stepped backward. Not running, not lunging, just stepped, and it was gone. No sprint, no leap, just absence. The cow it had bent over lay on the ground, already open, already empty, and there was still no blood. We dragged that one to the barn and locked the doors. Luke didn't speak on the walk back to the house. I didn't either. We both knew what we'd seen.
And we both knew it wasn't a man. The next morning, one of the ranch hands didn't show up. Miguel. He lived in the small trailer near the south fence. We drove down there. The door was open. Inside was quiet. Too quiet. The bed was made. Coffee mug still warm on the counter. And on the floor, Miguel lay on his back, arms at his sides, eyes open, chest split clean from throat to abdomen, empty, no blood, no organs, just a hollow cavity, like the cattle. But this time, there were drag marks, not on the floor, on the inside of his chest cavity, like something had reached in and pulled. Luke backed away first. I couldn't move. Because now it wasn't livestock. It wasn't property damage. It wasn't explainable. Something had escalated, and it had learned. The cows were practice. Miguel was proof. And outside the trailer, in the dirt just beyond the doorway, were two long impressions. Not footprints, not hoofprints, parallel grooves, as if something tall had stood there, watching, waiting, and that was only the beginning.
Part 2. It doesn't hunt. We didn't call the sheriff right away. That sounds bad. It sounds like guilt. But the truth is, when you see something that shouldn't exist, your mind doesn't reach for law enforcement. It reaches for denial. Luke stood in the doorway of Miguel's trailer, staring at the body like if he blinked long enough, the cavity would fill itself back in. No blood, he whispered again. That was the detail neither of us could process. The walls weren't splattered. The floor wasn't soaked. Miguel's clothes were cut clean through, like fabric parted under pressure instead of torn. The split down his torso was identical to the cow's, precise, vertical, controlled. This wasn't feeding, it was harvesting. And whatever took him didn't rush. There were no overturned chairs, no broken dishes. Miguel hadn't fought, which meant one of two things. It happened too fast, or he never believed he was in danger. We wrapped him in a tarp. I don't remember deciding to do that. I just remember Luke moving and me following. The trailer felt wrong, air too still, like something had just left and the room hadn't adjusted yet. Outside, the cattle were clustered at the far end of the pasture, all facing the barn, not grazing, just standing, watching. The sheriff arrived 30 minutes later. This time he didn't chew. He didn't talk much either. He stood over Miguel's body in the barn and took off his hat slowly. "I've never seen anything like this," he admitted. "Animal?" Luke asked. The sheriff looked at him. "No." That answer felt heavier than if he'd said yes. They sent someone from the state, an investigator. She arrived before sunset, Dr. Elaine Harper, early 40s, calm, sharp eyes that didn't flinch easily. She examined one of the cows first,
gloved hands tracing the seam. "No tearing," she said. "No teeth marks." She leaned closer. "This was separated at a cellular level." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means this wasn't cut with a blade." "Then what did it?" She didn't answer, because she didn't know. That night she stayed at the ranch, said she wanted to observe. We didn't argue. I don't think any of us wanted to be alone. We locked the barn, locked the house, turned on every exterior floodlight. The sky was clear, stars sharp, too peaceful for what was walking our land. Around 1:13 a.m., the power went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, off. Total darkness swallowed the house.
The dogs didn't bark this time. They didn't whine either. They went silent, utterly silent. That scared me more than the noise the night before. Dr. Harper stood from the kitchen table slowly. "That's not a grid failure," she said. "How do you know?" "Because my phone still has signal, not from the pasture, from the barn." A low, metallic groan, like weight settling against steel. Luke grabbed the rifle again. Dr. Harper told us to stay inside. We didn't listen. We stepped onto the porch. The air felt thick, heavy, like pressure building before a storm. Except there were no clouds. The barn doors were closed, but something inside was moving. Not thrashing, not panicking. Measured, deliberate. Then one of the cows screamed. You don't forget that sound. It's not a moo. It's not a lowing call. It's raw, panicked, and it cuts through you. Luke ran. I followed. Dr. Harper right behind us. We threw open the barn doors. The smell hit first. Not blood. Metal. Cold metal. And in the center of the barn floor, one cow lay already opened, empty. Another stood beside it, frozen. And between them, it, clearer this time, taller than before, its limbs too long, jointed wrong, not bending like a human. The vertical split down its torso wasn't clothing. It was part of it, a seam, like it could open too. The floodlights were dead, but moonlight poured through the slats high in the barn walls. Enough to see its surface wasn't skin. It looked like stretched hide, like the texture of the cows it emptied. Luke fired. The shot hit. I know it hit, because the body jerked. But there was no blood, no recoil. The thing turned slowly, its head tilted. No eyes, no mouth, just smooth curvature. And that split. Then it moved. Not at us, at Dr. Harper. It crossed the distance in 2 steps. Too fast. She didn't even scream. It reached forward, and its torso split open. Not wide, just enough. And something inside shifted, like muscle flexing without bones. Dr. Harper's body lifted slightly off the ground. Her arms jerked once. Then she went still. No tearing, no ripping, no violence like you expect. Just quiet, controlled. When it lowered her back to the dirt floor, her chest was open, empty. The barn floor was still dry. Luke fired again, and again. The sound was deafening inside the enclosed space. The thing stepped backward, not injured, not angry, just finished. And then it stepped into shadow and vanished. We didn't chase it. We couldn't. Luke dropped the rifle. I dropped to my knees beside Dr. Harper. Her face still looked confused, like she'd been trying to solve something when it happened. There was no blood on my hands when I touched her, just cold skin. The cow beside her finally collapsed, as if whatever held it upright had released. The barn felt enormous, empty, wrong. The power came back on exactly 7 minutes later. Every floodlight flickered to life. The house glowed again. The world resumed. Except now there were 2 human bodies in our barn. Opened,
hollow. And something had proven it wasn't hunting out of hunger. It was selective, intentional, escalating. The sheriff returned with more deputies. They didn't bring explanations this time. They brought caution tape and quiet fear. They tried to frame it as a wild animal anomaly, but no animal leaves no blood. No animal leaves symmetry. No animal learns. And this thing was learning. Because it didn't kill Luke. It didn't kill me. It chose the outsider, the investigator, the one trying to understand it. It removed the threat efficiently. That night, after they took the bodies away, Luke and I sat at the kitchen table. The house lights buzzed softly. The dogs lay flat on the floor, eyes open. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then Luke said something I can't stop thinking about. "It's not hunting," he said. "It's building." I looked at him. Building what? He stared out the window toward the pasture. Whatever it takes out of them, it's keeping. The image hit me like a punch. Miguel, the cows, Dr. Harper, not consumed, collected. And if that was true, then it wasn't done. Because 4 cows and 2 people don't make much of anything, not if you're building something larger. And outside, in the north pasture, the cattle were forming a loose circle again, facing inward, towards something we couldn't see. It wasn't hunting. It was preparing, and we were still on its land.
Part 3. The Circle. The sheriff closed the main road by sunrise. Officially, it was a livestock contamination issue. Unofficially, nobody wanted to drive past Turner Ranch after dark. They set up temporary flood towers along the fence line. Deputies rotated shifts. State wildlife was called in. 2 federal vehicles arrived before noon, unmarked. But none of that mattered, because by the time they started locking things down, it wasn't contained anymore. It started with the cattle. Not dead. Worse, they stopped eating. 400 head of cattle spread across 800 acres should look chaotic from above. They weren't. They were forming shapes, perfect circular clusters, 12, 24, 30 at a time, facing inward, heads angled toward the center of nothing, not grazing, not moving, just standing, waiting. When ranch hands tried to break the circles, the animals resisted, not violently. They simply returned, every time, like magnets snapping back into position. By late afternoon, 2 more ranch hands were missing. No blood, no struggle, just absence. One truck found idling near the creek. Driver door open. Footprints leading 10 feet into the field. Then nothing, as if the man had simply been lifted. The deputies began walking in pairs, then in groups. Nobody walked alone anymore, even during the day. Around 5:40 p.m., we saw something new. One of the cattle circles tightened. The animals moved closer together, compressing. Their bodies pressed flank to flank, heads lowered, and the ground in the center began to sink, not collapse, sink, like something beneath was drawing downward. The soil shifted inward, spiraling slowly. No sound, no tremor, just controlled descent. A deputy stepped forward instinctively. Luke grabbed his arm. "Don't." The ground in the center opened into a shallow depression, dark, smooth, not dug, formed. And from that depression, it rose. Not fast, not dramatic, just stood up from the earth, taller than before, broader. Its surface no longer looked like stretched hide. It looked layered, as if something beneath the outer skin was structuring itself, adding mass. The vertical seam down its torso was wider now, and inside, there was movement, shifting shapes pressing against the inner lining. The deputy fired immediately. Others followed. Rifles cracked in rapid succession. Dust kicked from the creature's frame, but it didn't stagger. Didn't bleed. Didn't react. It stepped forward once, and the nearest cow dropped instantly. No contact. No visible force. It just folded, chest splitting open empty before it hit the dirt. The cattle did not run. They did not scatter. They tightened their circle further, making space for it. That was when the first human screamed, not from the field, from the perimeter. A deputy near the south fence collapsed. His partner shouted. We all turned. The deputy was on his knees, hands clutching his chest, his uniform splitting open along the center seam. No blood, no tearing, just parting. He fell forward, hollow, 30 yards from the entity. It hadn't touched him. It didn't need to. Panic finally broke the formation. Gunfire became erratic. Men shouted orders. Some ran. Some froze. The cattle scattered at last, but not far. They didn't flee the pasture. They just widened the circle, as if maintaining distance for something larger. The entity stepped once more, then stopped. Its head turned slowly, scanning, not hunting randomly, selecting. It tilted slightly toward the federal vehicles parked near the gate. One of the agents raised a radio. The signal died instantly, and the agent dropped, chest opening like the others. Empty. Luke grabbed me. We need to leave. Now. But as we backed toward the house, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Across the pasture, beyond our land, cattle from neighboring ranches were forming circles too. Hundreds of animals. Perfect rings in distant fields. All facing inward. All waiting. It wasn't just Turner Ranch. It had spread. Or it had always been wider. And we had only just seen it rise. By nightfall, the property was a war zone without explosions. 8 confirmed dead. 3 missing. Dozens of cattle opened. Still no blood anywhere. No remains. No organs. Nothing left behind. Whatever it took, it kept. Helicopters arrived after dark. Searchlights swept the fields. Thermal imaging showed heat signatures in the cattle clusters, but the entity itself barely registered. Its outline flickered, like it didn't hold temperature the way living things do. Then, under the beam of one helicopter spotlight, it did something new. It opened. The vertical seam spread wider than before, and inside, shapes pressed outward. Human shapes, half-formed, limbs incomplete, faces smooth and unfinished, not attached to the exterior.
Growing within it, like something assembling from harvested material. The helicopter pilot shouted something over the loudspeaker. The beam wavered, and the aircraft lurched violently. Midair. No explosion. No projectile. It just dropped, like its structure had failed. The crash lit the pasture orange for 3 seconds. Flames roared. Metal screamed. Then silence. The entity closed and stepped backward, slowly descending into the depression it had formed. The ground sealed behind it, perfectly smooth, like it had never been disturbed. The cattle resumed their circles, smaller now, tighter, waiting. By midnight, the National Guard was mobilizing. Roadblocks extended 5 miles out. News choppers circled but were forced back. Official statements called it a chemical contamination event. But there was no chemical, no toxin, no gas, just absence, just hollow bodies, just something in the earth learning how to stand upright. Luke and I sat inside the house again. Lights on, windows covered. The dogs lay motionless. Outside, the cattle stood in silent rings under the moon. I realized something that chilled me more than the deaths. It didn't rush. It didn't lash out randomly. It appeared when enough bodies gathered, when circles formed, when structure stabilized. The cattle weren't victims anymore. They were anchors. And if that was true, then we weren't safe inside the house, because houses are structures too. And we were sitting together, in a room, in a shape, forming something it understood. Luke slowly stood up. What if it needs symmetry? I looked at him. What if the circles are just a starting point? Outside, the cattle shifted slightly, their formation tightening, and in the center of each distant ring, the ground began to sink. This wasn't a predator. It wasn't even a creature in the normal sense. It was constructing, growing, multiplying, and we had just witnessed the first completed rise. There would be more, many more, because there were thousands of cattle across this county, and plenty of people, and the circles were forming everywhere now.
Part 4. Containment. By dawn, Turner Ranch was no longer a crime scene. It was a military zone. Convoys rolled in before the sun cleared the horizon. Armored vehicles, portable flood towers, communication trucks with satellite dishes unfolding like mechanical flowers. Soldiers in full gear moved fast and precise, setting perimeter lines and expanding grids. They weren't talking about contamination anymore. They were talking about hostile presence. Luke and I were ordered into the house and told to stay there. 2 soldiers positioned outside our front porch, another pair behind the barn. Snipers on elevated rigs facing the north pasture. Through the living room window, I watched cattle still standing in circles. Perfect. Unbroken. Not grazing. Not moving. Waiting. The depression in the north pasture had sealed overnight, but the soil looked darker there. Compressed, like something had packed it down from beneath. At 8:17 a.m., the first operation began. Drones launched from the far field, buzzing low across the grass. Thermal cameras live-streamed to a command tent set up near the main gate. We could see the footage on one of the soldiers' tablets when he stepped inside to check on us. The circles were visible from above. Precise rings. Almost geometric. Jesus, the soldier muttered. The drone hovered above the North Depression. The ground trembled slightly. Then the feed glitched. Static rolled across the screen. The drone dropped straight down. No explosion. No visible interference. Just sudden failure. The soldier looked at his radio. All units, maintain distance from the center formation. Too late. The cattle shifted. All at once. Every ring tightened. Heads lowered. And the ground began to sink again. Not just in the north pasture. Across the property. 5 separate depressions forming simultaneously.
And the cattle closest to them began to drop. One by one. No contact. Just collapse. Chests parting mid-fall. Empty before they hit the dirt. A soldier screamed through the radio. "It's not touching them." His voice cut off. He fell where he stood. Armor splitting clean down the center. Plate separating like it had been unlatched. His body folded forward. Hollow. No blood on the grass. The gunfire intensified. Rockets launched from shoulder rigs streaked across the field and detonated against one of the entities. The blast threw dirt and smoke into the air. For a second, it disappeared. When the smoke cleared, the outer layer was shredded. But inside, something louved. Shapes, pressing outward against translucent inner lining. Not fully human, not fully animal. Assemblies. The entity took one step forward. 3 soldiers dropped instantly, their bodies opening in perfect symmetry. The ground beneath them still dry. Inside the house, the windows rattled from concussive blasts. Luke gripped the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. "They're not fighting it right," he whispered. I knew what he meant. This wasn't a creature reacting to threat. It was continuing a process.
The gunfire didn't provoke it. It didn't enrage it. It ignored force unless something interfered with its structure. And the cattle circles were stabilizing it. 5 rings, 5 entities, 5 construction sites. A command came over the loudspeakers outside. Airstrike authorized. The soldiers began retreating to marked safe zones. Jets screamed overhead minutes later. The first missile hit the north pasture. The explosion was violent. Earth erupted. Shockwaves cracked windows. Flames engulfed the depression and everything around it. 2 more strikes followed in rapid succession. The pasture became a burning crater. Cattle bodies scattered. Smoke billowed into the sky. For a moment, there was hope. The flames burned hot and bright. The shapes were gone. No movement in the fire. No rising silhouettes. Just destruction. But the other 4 depressions, still intact. The other entities, still standing. And they were changing. The vertical seams along their torsos began to open wider. Not in response to the missiles. In response to the loss of one. Like an adaptive shift. Their surfaces rippled. And something began pushing outward. Limbs forming. Arms branching from the layered mass. Not smooth.
Not finished, but defined. They were building external structure now. The air felt charged. The soldiers opened higher again, but it tilted, not crashed, twisted, like soft wire under invisible torque. The tower collapsed sideways, crushing 2 men beneath it. Their bodies opened before the structure even finished falling. Then the ground beneath the house shuddered, not violently, but enough to make the cabinets rattle. Luke looked at me slowly. They don't need the pasture. Outside, the cattle rings had widened, expanding outward, forming larger circles, encircling not just the depressions, but the house, and the military vehicles, and the command tent. They were anchoring new centers, using whatever stood within the ring. The entities stepped toward the nearest circle of soldiers, and the air between them shimmered. 5 men collapsed simultaneously, chests splaying open in perfect mirrored seams. The soldiers broke formation. Retreat turned into chaos. Radios filled with overlapping commands. Another missile streaked down and struck one of the entities directly. This time the explosion tore through the torso, shredded it apart. Fragments scattered across the field. The vertical seam ruptured fully, and what spilled out was not blood, not tissue. It was forms, half-complete human shapes, limbs twitching, faces blank. They hit the ground and dissolved into dark residue that soaked instantly into the soil. The entity collapsed into itself, falling inward like deflating scaffolding. For a brief second, silence. Then the remaining 3 entities shifted. They stepped closer together, their seams widening, and something unseen pulsed between them. The ground quaked harder this time. Not a tremor, a coordinated contraction. And in the center of the largest cattle ring, the earth tore open, wider than before, deeper, and something larger began to rise. Not fully visible, just the upper curve of a structure. Massive, layered, still forming. The 3 smaller entities turned toward it, as if feeding it, their surfaces dimming slightly, contributing. The soldiers began full evacuation. Retreat orders blared through speakers. Engines roared. Vehicles reversed fast and slobby. Another jet passed overhead, but before it could release,
the aircraft jerked sideways mid-air, tilted unnaturally, and fell. No explosion, just structural failure. It hit the ground beyond the west fence in a plume of smoke and dirt. Luke grabbed my arm. We have to get out. But when we stepped toward the front door, we saw the cattle. They had formed a perfect ring around the house, 3 rows deep, facing inward, silent, unblinking. The entities no longer needed the pasture. They needed symmetry, and we were in the center of it. The ground beneath the house began to sink, not collapsing, lowering, steadily. The walls creaked, glass cracked along the edges. Outside, soldiers screamed for air support that wasn't responding. The larger structure in the pasture continued rising, segment by segment, layer upon layer, building something enormous. And we were being lowered into the soil, controlled, measured, like livestock, prepared. The last thing I saw before the porch tilted was one of the entities turning its smooth head toward the house, and the seam along its torso opening, wider than ever before.
Part 5. The Sink. The house didn't collapse. It descended. That was the worst part. No explosion, no dramatic break in the foundation. The entire structure lowered evenly into the earth, as if placed on a hidden platform being drawn down by machinery. The windows didn't shatter all at once. They cracked along the edges in thin spiderweb lines as pressure shifted around the frame. Luke grabbed the door handle. It wouldn't budge. Not locked. Sealed. The air inside the house felt denser by the second. Outside, the cattle ring held firm, 3 rows deep, perfect spacing. Not one animal turned away. The military vehicles beyond them were reversing in chaos, but none could get close enough to reach us. We were already below ground level. The porch was flush with the soil, then lower, dirt sliding upward against the siding. Controlled burial. The ceiling creaked overhead. Dust drifted down in soft, steady trails. "It's compressing," Luke said, voice tight. The floor beneath us wasn't collapsing. It was being displaced, lowered into something hollow, something prepared. The larger structure in the pasture was still rising, segment by segment, towering now, at least 40 feet tall, layered like stacked rib cages fused together. The 3 remaining entities stood around it, torsos open, contributing mass, feeding it, building it. The house tilted slightly. One picture frame fell from the wall. The sound of glass breaking was strangely small compared to everything else happening. The air pressure changed. My ears popped. And then, the floor dropped 6 inches at once. Luke staggered. The kitchen table slid toward the far wall. Outside, the cattle didn't react. Not one flinch. The foundation cracked. Not violently. Clean splits, like the seams on the bodies. Vertical lines forming through drywall. Up the walls. Across the ceiling. Mirroring the pattern. I felt it before I understood it. The structure wasn't just lowering us. It was aligning us, centering us. The house was becoming part of the circle, and the circle was becoming part of something larger. Then the first scream came from outside the ring, a soldier who had tried to breach the cattle formation. He pushed through 2 animals. They didn't resist. They simply allowed him inside the ring. The moment he crossed fully into the interior, he collapsed, chest splitting mid-step, empty before he hit the dirt.
The cattle shifted to close the gap he left. Symmetry restored instantly. The house floor cracked open beneath us, a narrow line first, then widening. The basement. We didn't have a basement. Turner Ranch homes don't need them. But the floor was splitting downward into darkness. Not broken concrete, not debris. A smooth, vertical cavity forming beneath the structure. Engineered. Luke grabbed the rifle again. Pointless, but instinctive. The split widened. The floor dropped another foot. The couch slid into the opening and vanished silently. No crash, no impact sound. Just swallowed. We backed against the far wall. The house groaned as it continued sinking. And then, the wall in front of us parted. Clean. Vertical. Just like the bodies. Drywall separating without dust. Studs splitting like fabric. Beyond it, not soil, not foundation. Space. A massive hollow chamber beneath the pasture. Perfectly circular. Walls smooth and layered. Not carved. Grown. And at the center of that underground chamber, something enormous. The lower half of the structure we had seen rising above ground, its base extending downward like roots. Not random, organized, segmented, connected. It wasn't just building upward, it was building down. The house had been lowered directly into the chamber, placed precisely within the inner ring. Luke stared into it. That's not a nest. He was right. Nests are chaotic. This was architecture. From the center mass, 3 smaller shapes detached. Not fully formed entities, but incomplete constructs. Humanoid. Thin. Skin stretched too tight. Faces smooth and unfinished. They stepped across the chamber floor without sound. Toward us. Luke fired. The first construct's upper torso ruptured, but there was no blood, just dark particulate spilling outward before reabsorbing into the chamber walls. It didn't slow. It reached the edge of the split wall, extended one elongated arm, and Luke's body jerked forward. No visible force, just a violent pull. He slammed against the half-open wall, and the seam appeared down his chest. He didn't scream long, just a sharp inhale, then silence. He collapsed backward, empty. I caught him before he hit the floor. His eyes were open, still aware, but there was nothing behind them. The construct didn't retreat. It stepped forward again, and something inside the central structure shifted. A pulse, like a heart testing its rhythm.
The chamber walls tightened slightly. The constructs turned toward the core, carrying Luke's absence with them, feeding it. I backed toward the far corner of the room. The floor was almost entirely gone now, only a narrow strip of intact wood beneath my feet. Below, the chamber hummed faintly. Not mechanical, not organic. Both. The largest segment in the center flexed, and something inside it pressed outward. Not human, not animal. A composite. Multiple torsos layered together. Limbs fused at wrong angles. Faces embedded along the surface. Unfinished but forming. Miguel. Dr. Harper. Luke. I could see fragments of them. Integrated. Not alive, but not erased. Used. The realization broke something in my chest. This wasn't feeding for sustenance. It was assembling. Building mass. Constructing a larger body from harvested cavities. And it was nearly complete. Above ground, explosions still echoed faintly. But down here, it was calm, controlled, measured. The cattle ring overhead stabilized the chamber. I understood it now. The circles weren't rituals. They were structural anchors. Load-bearing symmetry. The more bodies inside the ring, the stronger the formation. The chamber walls shifted again, and the final intact strip of floor beneath me split open. I fell. Not far. 10 feet. Landing hard on smooth, warm surface. The chamber floor wasn't soil. It was layered material. Compressed biological matter. Organized. Alive in a way I couldn't define. The 3 constructs turned toward me. Not rushing. Not frantic. They didn't need to hurry. The ring above held. The structure was stable. I scrambled backward. My hand slipped into a shallow groove in the floor. A seam, running in perfect vertical alignment. Through the chamber. Up through the house. Up through the pasture. All the way into the rising mass above ground. One continuous split. Like the entire thing was one body. And it was preparing to open. The central mass began to part. Slowly. Wider than any seam before. Inside. Movement. A larger frame pushing outward. A complete shape. Not thin like the others. Broad. Heavy. Defined. A head forming with features emerging beneath stretched hide. Eye sockets carving inward. A mouth separating.
It was finalizing, and I was the last piece inside the ring. The constructs approached. One extended its arm toward my chest. The air pressure increased instantly.
My ribs felt like they were being measured, aligned, prepared for parting. I heard the faintest cracking sound. Not bone breaking, positioning. And above us, the structure breached the surface fully, the massive body rising into the open air, form complete, balanced, ready to walk.
The pressure on my chest tightened, not crushing, not stabbing, aligning, like invisible hands were tracing my sternum, measuring distance, finding center. The construct's elongated arm hovered inches from me. I could feel the air thinning around my ribs. The chamber hummed louder. The massive form in the center continued separating, pushing outward from the layered core. Its head finished shaping first. Deep-set eye cavities opened, dark, wet, reflective, not blank like the smaller constructs, aware. The mouth tore open vertically, not horizontal, splitting from nose down to throat, mirroring every body it had harvested. It wasn't copying us, it was standardizing us. I felt the seam start, a faint heat line running down the center of my chest. No blade, no contact, just separation. My breath hitched, and that disruption, that single uneven inhale, changed something. The pressure faltered, just slightly. The seam didn't widen. The construct's arm twitched. The chamber walls rippled. The ring above must have shifted, because the hum lost its perfect rhythm. And then, gunfire erupted from above ground, louder than before, closer, heavy caliber, sustained. The cattle ring broke. I felt it, like tension wires snapping. The chamber ceiling trembled. Chunks of layered material mained down. The massive forming body staggered mid-rise. Its upper torso half emerged from the core, incomplete, unstable. Above ground, something massive detonated. Not a missile, a controlled charge, engineered. The pasture shook violently. The hum shattered into chaotic vibration. The constructs around me jerked erratically, their movements no longer smooth. One stumbled sideways. Another's limb separated at the joint and dissolved into dark particulate. The seam down my chest faded. Pain replaced it. Real pain. My lungs burned as air rushed back unevenly. The chamber ceiling cracked, a vertical fissure running through the entire structure. Not clean, jagged. The anchor was compromised. The cattle had scattered. Without the circle, the architecture destabilized. A soldier dropped through the fractured ceiling, not falling cleanly, sliding through broken material. He hit the chamber floor hard, coughing, covered in dirt and black residue. He saw me, saw the constructs, didn't hesitate. He fired a shotgun blast point blank into the nearest one. This time, it tore through.
Because the structure wasn't stable enough to absorb the damage, the construct ruptured, collapsed inward. The other two tried to retreat toward the core, but the core itself was destabilizing. The half-formed giant body convulsed, its vertical mouth opened wider. Not controlled, screaming. Not a human scream, a layered one, multiple tones overlapping. Miguel's voice, Dr. Harper's, Luke's, fragmented, distorted, all inside it. The soldier grabbed my arm. Move. We ran toward the fractured ceiling. The chamber floor buckled, sections collapsing inward. The giant body tried to pull itself free from the core, but its lower half was still fused into the layered mass. The soldier reached the broken edge and hauled himself upward. I climbed behind him. The earth above was chaos, smoke, burning pasture, armored vehicles overturned, cattle scattered in all directions. The remaining entities on the surface were gone, not destroyed, absorbed, recalled into the core. The rising structure was collapsing inward on itself. Without symmetry, it couldn't hold shape. The soldier pulled me clear of the sinking ground. And then, the pasture imploded. The entire central area caved downward in a massive inward collapse, not exploding outward, folding in, as if the structure had been vacuum sealed.
Dirt and debris shot upward briefly. Then everything settled. Silence followed. Thick, uncertain. Where the chamber had been, there was now a crater. Deep, wide, smoldering. No giant body, no constructs, no visible remains. Just a dark, circular pit, perfectly round. Helicopters circled cautiously, but none approached low. The soldier beside me spoke into his radio with a shaking voice. Primary mass neutralized. Structure collapsed. Heavy casualties. He didn't finish the sentence. Bodies lay scattered across the pasture. Opened. Hollow. Cattle, too. The ring was gone, but the damage remained. I searched the field instinctively. For Luke. There was nothing. No remains. Nothing to bury. He was part of it. Part of the structure that had nearly walked free. They evacuated me before nightfall. Medical tent first, then transport. Questions came in waves. What did it look like? How did it move? How did it kill? I answered as clearly as I could, but I left one thing out. The feeling, the alignment, the way the seam had begun to open without pain, without violence, as if my body had agreed.
The crater was sealed off within hours. Concrete trucks arrived by morning. They didn't study it long. They didn't excavate. They poured. Layer after layer of reinforced concrete, 20 feet thick. Then steel plating. Then soil. Official statement. Underground methane pocket ignited during wildlife incident. Ranch declared total loss. County declared restricted zone. The military left 3 days later. But not all of them. A small perimeter remained. Permanent. Unmarked. I was relocated to a facility outside Austin. Observation. Psych evaluation. Blood work. Scans. They found nothing wrong with me. No infection. No structural anomaly. No scar where the seam had begun. Physically, I was intact. But something wasn't right. Because at night, when the room was perfectly quiet, I could hear it. Faint. Like distant breathing beneath concrete. Slow. Measured. Incomplete. Not dead. Recovering. And sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I saw the crater. Not empty. Not collapsed. But layered again. Rebuilding from within. Slower this time. Deeper. Learning from failure. Symmetry had been broken. But only temporarily. Because there are thousands of ranches in this country. Millions of cattle. Endless open land. And all it needs is a circle.
Part 7. Containment failure. They kept me for 19 days. Walt walls, fluorescent lights, interviews that looped in circles. Every conversation came back to the same question. How did it coordinate? They didn't ask what it was. They didn't ask if it was alive. They asked how it organized. Because that was the part they feared most. An organism can be hunted. A structure can be demolished. But a pattern spreads. The crater at Turner Ranch was sealed under reinforced concrete and steel plating thick enough to hold a skyscraper. Thermal scans showed nothing. Seismic monitors detected no movement. For 3 days. On the 4th day, the tremors began. Subtle. Rhythmic. Not random geological activity. Pulses. 6-second intervals. Then 8. Then 12. As if something beneath was recalibrating. Adapting to weight. Adapting to resistance. They increased surveillance. Brought in ground-penetrating radar. The radar didn't show a cavity anymore. It showed density. Layered density. Compact. Not hollow. That unsettled them more. Because collapse means absence. Density means presence. On day 11, cattle from a ranch 12 miles east began forming circles. Small at first.
5 or 6 animals, facing inward. Ranch hands thought it was a heat response, until one of the cows dropped, chest splitting clean down the center. No blood. The rancher called local authorities. They called the same people who had sealed Turner Ranch. And that's when the word containment stopped being used. They started saying spread. I wasn't told immediately. I saw it in the eyes of the guard outside my room. He didn't knock before entering, didn't make small talk. Another ranch, he said. That was it. He didn't need to elaborate. I already knew. They had sealed the crater, but they hadn't sealed the pattern. The circle wasn't tied to location. It was tied to form. Livestock clustering. Mass gathered symmetrically. Structure stabilizing. That was the trigger. 2 days later, 3 ranches reported the same phenomenon. Different counties, different soil, different ownership. All cattle forming inward-facing rings. All animals collapsing without contact. All bodies hollow. And this time, the circles weren't waiting for night. They formed in broad daylight. Visible. Unashamed. The military didn't attempt airstrikes immediately. They tried disruption. Helicopters flew low to scatter cattle.
Sonic devices blasted irregular frequencies. Flamethrowers were deployed along outer perimeters to break formations. It worked. Temporarily, the rings fractured, animals ran, but within minutes, they reformed. Not in the same spot, in better spots, flatter terrain, fewer obstructions, improved stability. It was learning efficiency. Then came the first human circle. A feedlot worker in Eastland County reported dizziness while standing near a forming cattle ring. He stepped back, tripped. 3 other workers rushed to help. They formed a loose triangle over him. Not intentional, just instinct. The moment they completed the shape, the ground beneath them sank. Not fully, just inches, enough to destabilize, and all 4 men dropped simultaneously, chests opening mid-fall. No contact, no visible entity, just a completed geometric formation triggering collapse. When that report reached my facility, the tone shifted. They weren't dealing with a roaming creature anymore. They were dealing with a reactive system. It didn't need to appear. It needed arrangement. Mass positioned correctly. Symmetry achieved. Then activation. On day 15, the tremors beneath Turner Ranch intensified. The sealed concrete cracked along a perfect vertical line, not from pressure outward, from something aligning beneath it. Engineers poured additional reinforcement, triple the thickness, steel mesh interwoven. They worked fast, because satellite imaging showed something worse. Across Texas, across Oklahoma, across Kansas, livestock forming rings, hundreds of them, small at first, 5, 10, 15 animals, all facing inward, all waiting. The system wasn't building a single body anymore. It was creating nodes, multiple potential rise points, distributed construction, redundancy. The night it breached containment again, the sky was clear. No storms, no seismic warnings. At 02:14 a.m., every monitor at Turner Ranch spiked simultaneously. Heat signature, pressure, internal density shift. Then, the reinforced concrete dome split clean down the middle. Not exploding, parting, vertical seam, perfect. From beneath, something pushed upward. Not massive this time, not towering, smaller, compact, refined. The previous giant had been inefficient. This version was optimized, humanoid, 10 feet tall, balanced proportions, layered skin tighter, eye sockets fully formed, mouth vertical, but controlled.
It stepped onto the surface without staggering. Stable. Complete. And it didn't wait for cattle. Because by then, the surrounding perimeter team had already formed a loose defensive line. 6 soldiers, equidistant, facing inward, protecting the split dome, unknowingly forming a ring. The moment their spacing stabilized, all 6 collapsed, chests opening in flawless symmetry. The new entity didn't move toward them. It stepped past them, toward the highway. The guard outside my room didn't hide it anymore. "It's moving," he said. "Where? Doesn't matter." He was wrong. It mattered. Because this version didn't need livestock. It had internal mass now, stored density, stored structure. It could trigger collapse from smaller formations, people standing in circles, crowds, meetings, funerals, protests, anywhere bodies gather evenly, anywhere spacing aligns. At 09:30 a.m., a church congregation in Abilene reported dizziness during service, rows aligned, symmetrical seating, organ music sustaining tone. The building partially sank before the first body dropped. 12 dead, all opened, no visible entity caught on camera, just vertical seams appearing simultaneously. By noon, the official narrative broke. News stations stopped using words like contamination. They started using unknown phenomenon. Videos leaked online, clips of cattle rings, clips of men collapsing mid-conversation. One viral clip showed a small town council meeting where 5 members seated in a perfect semicircle all dropped at once, chests parting, microphones capturing the soft sound of separation. No blood, just absence. They transferred me that evening, not for safety, for consultation, because I had been inside the chamber, I had seen the structure, and they finally understood something I had tried to tell them. It's not a predator, I said. It's an architect. Silence filled the briefing room. Screens behind me showed live satellite feeds, circles forming in fields, parking lots, schoolyards during recess, unintentional patterns triggering localized collapse. It needs symmetry, one analyst whispered. No, I said, it uses symmetry, and it was refining. Smaller body, more mobile, less dependent on mass, capable of activating wherever geometry allowed. That night, the first city evacuation began, not because it was seen, because people realized how often they stand in circles.
How often we gather evenly without thinking. Football games, classrooms, dining tables, conference rooms. Human life organizes itself naturally. And the thing had learned to weaponize that instinct. Before midnight, reports came in from 3 different states. All confirmed. All identical. Small groupings collapsing into hollow bodies. No visible attacker. Just the sound of vertical seams parting in unison. And somewhere beneath reinforced concrete in West Texas, the original mass continued to pulse. Not dead. Not destroyed. Just reduced. Because the optimized version was walking now. And it no longer needed the pasture.
Part 8. The walking structure. The optimized version was caught on clear video for the first time outside Sweetwater. Not thermal distortion, not glitching footage, not half-seen shapes in smoke. Clear daylight. It crossed a service road behind a truck stop at 6:42 a.m. 10 feet tall, balanced. Its surface no longer looked loosely layered. It was compressed now, dense, uniform, reinforced by whatever mass it had harvested. The vertical seam along its torso remained visible, but tighter, like a reinforced joint rather than a weakness. It didn't move like a predator. It moved like a surveyor. Head turning slowly, scanning spacing, measuring. 2 highway workers stood near an orange barrel cluster about 30 yards away. They weren't looking at it. They were arguing about something trivial. They stood almost opposite each other. A third worker walked toward them. He stopped between them. Triangle formed. Perfect enough. All 3 collapsed at once, chests parting cleanly. The entity never broke stride. It didn't need proximity anymore. It needed formation. The footage was replayed in the operations room where they had brought me. No one spoke while it looped. A general finally asked, "Is it projecting something? Radiation? Frequency?" "No," I said. "It's resolving structural balance." Blank stares. I clarified. It senses symmetry. When bodies distribute evenly in space, it completes the equation. The room stayed silent, because that wasn't a weapon you could jam. You can't outlaw geometry. Evacuations escalated. Public alerts instructed citizens. Avoid circular gatherings. Avoid standing equidistant in small groups. Avoid symmetrical seating. It sounded insane on national broadcasts, until the deaths multiplied. A high school gym class formed a half circle during roll call. 8 students collapsed. A backyard barbecue where guests sat evenly spaced around a patio table.
6 dead. A family dinner where 5 chairs were placed evenly, 4 hollow bodies. The 5th survived only because the spacing wasn't exact. People started staggering their positions deliberately, chairs placed at odd angles, meetings held in messy clusters, crowds instructed to move irregularly. Chaos became safety. Disorder became protection. The entity reached Abilene by nightfall. It didn't enter the city center immediately. It walked the outskirts first. Industrial zones, storage yards, open fields.
It was avoiding dense urban grids, because cities are complex, too many angles, too many asymmetries. It preferred manageable symmetry, farm towns, suburbs, controlled geometry. It approached a small outdoor vigil near a roadside memorial, 12 people standing in a ring, candles in hand. The news helicopter captured the moment from above. The ring was nearly perfect. Within seconds, all 12 dropped, candles falling into the grass, flames still burning beside hollow bodies. The entity stepped through the circle without pause, as if harvesting the energy released by the collapse. The military attempted coordinated strike teams again, but they adapted strategy. Instead of forming lines or squads, they moved in erratic, irregular clusters, spacing randomized, movement unpredictable. It slowed the entity's activation, but it didn't stop it, because the environment itself began cooperating. Parking lot striping, fence posts, streetlights spaced evenly, power poles running in straight intervals. The world is full of symmetry. The entity learned to anchor off structures. When 3 soldiers took cover behind evenly spaced concrete barriers, they collapsed instantly. When the sniper positioned himself centered between 2 rooftop HVAC units, he fell before firing. The thing didn't need people to form circles anymore. It used architecture. By day 27, reports confirmed something worse. The optimized entity wasn't alone. 3 more had surfaced, smaller than the original giant, larger than the constructs, all refined, all mobile, all scanning. They weren't replicating randomly. They were dividing labor. One moved through agricultural zones, one through highways and industrial outskirts, one along small-town residential grids. The original sealed crater continued pulsing beneath reinforced concrete, but satellite scans showed it was no longer expanding upward. It was dense, concentrated, like a power source. The walking structures were extensions, distributed limbs. They moved at a steady walking pace, not sprinting, not charging, 10 to 15 miles per day. Deliberate, because panic would create disorder, and disorder weakened their activation. They didn't want panic. They wanted organization. And humans naturally organize when frightened. We group, we cluster, we form defensive circles. That instinct was killing us. The first major urban incident happened in Fort Worth, a traffic jam.
Cars aligned bumper to bumper in 3 clean lanes. Perfect spacing, symmetrical distribution across a straight roadway. No circles, no obvious gathering, just alignment. Drivers began collapsing inside their vehicles, one by one, across all 3 lanes. Chest splitting open, airbags not deployed, no collision. Just drivers going still behind windshields. 47 dead before emergency responders forced vehicles into irregular angles to break the formation. The entity responsible never appeared on camera. It didn't need to. The road itself had been the ring. By the end of that week, official casualty numbers were withheld. Too high, too widespread. The pattern was clear. The thing was accelerating. Not physically, strategically. Every time we adjusted, it refined. Smaller activation thresholds, less perfect symmetry required. A triangle became enough, sometimes just 3 points in relative balance. It was optimizing toward minimal conditions. They moved me again, this time underground, a facility designed without straight corridors, no parallel hallways, rooms offset deliberately, walls angled unpredictably.
they had learned. But the fear inside the facility was worse than the open fields, because inside humans crave structure, order, clean spacing. And now that instinct felt like a loaded weapon. No one stood directly opposite another person anymore. Meetings were chaotic clusters of uneven chairs. Even sleeping quarters were offset irregularly. We were redesigning human behavior around the absence of symmetry. Then came the night it entered a city. Not outskirts, not industrial zones. Downtown Abilene. The entity walked through an intersection at 2:11 a.m. Traffic lights were evenly spaced, crosswalk lines painted in perfect intervals, street lamps aligned in uniform distance. The moment it stepped into the center of the grid, windows along the street shattered. People inside apartments collapsed in mirrored positions across floors. Some alone, some beside spouses. Beds placed symmetrically within rooms triggered activation. Entire floors went silent in seconds. The entity didn't speed up, didn't pause. It simply walked, and buildings emptied around it. We watched the live feeds in horror. "This isn't expansion," someone whispered. "It's calibration." They were right. The original giant had been brute mass. These were precision tools, lean, targeted, efficient.
They weren't trying to overwhelm humanity. They were restructuring it, forcing us into irregularity, forcing us to abandon symmetry, forcing the world to become unstable. Because once society breaks formation, control collapses, and in collapse, new structure can be imposed. At 3:02 a.m., something unprecedented happened. Two entities crossed paths at the edge of the city. They stopped, faced each other, stood equidistant between 4 streetlights, perfect square. For 5 seconds, nothing happened. Then both staggered, their seams flickering. The square destabilized, because the geometry was too perfect, too balanced, no central anchor. They were part of the same system. Symmetry without hierarchy canceled activation. They broke formation instinctively, stepped apart, recovered. That was when we understood. They required hierarchy within symmetry, a dominant center, a focal point. Without it, they destabilized. And that meant something critical. The original core beneath Turner Ranch was still active, still the anchor. The walking structures were extensions, but they depended on the primary source. Destroy the anchor, and the distributed bodies might collapse or lose coordination. But the crater was buried under reinforced concrete and military occupation, and every attempt to breach it risked forming the very symmetry it required. At 5:17 a.m., the pulsing beneath the sealed crater spiked again, stronger than before. The anchor was responding. The walking entities had gathered enough mass, enough hollow bodies, enough structural harvest. The next phase wasn't multiplication, it was convergence.
Part 9. Convergence. By the time the 4th structure appeared on satellite, no one called them creatures anymore. They were referred to as units, mobile extensions, distributed bodies. Language became clinical because fear had stopped helping. The 4 units were moving in arcs, not random, not hunting, returning. All trajectories calculated toward the sealed crater at Turner Ranch, toward the anchor, the original mass beneath 20 feet of reinforced concrete and steel. The pulse readings from underground had intensified, slow at first, then steady, then rhythmic. Not like breathing, like synchronization. The units were syncing. Evacuation orders spread across 3 counties, but evacuation creates highways, highways create lanes, lanes create symmetry. They staggered exit routes, forced vehicles into irregular patterns. Police blocked clean formations. It slowed casualties, but it didn't stop the units, because the closer they got to the anchor, the less perfect the geometry needed to be. 3 fence posts in a line became enough. 2 parked tractors balanced across a dirt road triggered partial activation. Farm dogs dropped dead without visible injury. Cattle collapsed in broken pairs. The units were drawing energy simply from distribution. They no longer needed perfect circles. The field itself was sufficient. I was flown back, against my protests. They needed proximity analysis. They needed someone who had felt the seam begin. We landed 5 miles from the crater. The air already felt wrong, heavy, pressurized, like standing before a storm without wind. The perimeter had been expanded, concrete cap reinforced again, steel braces driven deep into soil. Ground-penetrating radar showed the core had not expanded upward, it had condensed, dense beyond measurable material standards, as if gravity itself were pooling beneath it. The units were now less than 30 miles out, 4 converging vectors. If they reached the anchor, symmetry would re-establish at scale. Not a circle of cattle, not a triangle of workers, a radial network, 4 equidistant extensions feeding into one center. Perfect hierarchy, perfect balance, perfect structure. And then it would rise again, but stable this time. The generals asked the only question left: what happens if all 4 reach the crater? It stands up, I said, not guessing, knowing. It wouldn't split apart mid-formation like before.
It had refined, optimized, distributed testing across miles. It would rise balanced. And once it stood, cities wouldn't matter. Highways wouldn't matter. It would anchor off the curvature of the earth itself. A plan formed, desperate, brutal, not to destroy the anchor, to unbalance it. They couldn't risk symmetrical charges placed evenly around the crater. That would trigger activation. Instead, they prepared a massive directional bore on one side only, off-center. Drill deep, inject unstable compounds, collapse one quadrant of the core, force asymmetry at the source. If hierarchy broke, the units might destabilize. But the timing had to be precise, before convergence. By dusk, we could see the first unit on the horizon, tall, dark, walking steadily through open ranchland. No hesitation. Its seam flickered faintly, like a heartbeat. The second unit appeared hours later from the opposite direction. The other 2 were still miles out. The bore began drilling at an angle, off-center. No circular perimeter. Workers positioned irregularly. Movement chaotic by design. The ground vibrated as the drill bit penetrated reinforced concrete and soil. The pulse beneath intensified. The unit nearest us stopped walking, turned its head toward the crater. It felt the intrusion. The second unit accelerated, not running, but faster, longer strides. The drill struck something dense, resistance far beyond concrete or stone. Metal screamed as the bit strained. The operator hesitated. "Keep going," the general ordered. The first unit was now within a mile. Cattle in nearby fields began collapsing spontaneously, not in circles, just scattered. The pulse frequency shifted. Faster. Higher. The air vibrated. My chest tightened again, that measuring sensation returning. The seam ghosting down my sternum. Not opening, but aligning. The anchor was preparing. The third and fourth units changed direction slightly, adjusting to perfect radial spacing. 4 equidistant points forming around the crater, even miles apart. The geometry was clean. Too clean. The drill finally pierced the outer layer of the core. Black material surged upward around the bid. Not liquid, not solid. Viscous density. It climbed the drill shaft, spreading toward the surface. The operator screamed. They pulled back. Too late. The black mass reached ground level and hardened instantly, forming a vertical column beside the bore site.
A partial extension. The anchor was defending. "Inject now," someone shouted. The unstable compound pumped down the bore line, off-center, too late to avoid reaction. The first unit reached the outer perimeter fence. It didn't touch it. The fence posts themselves bent inward. Alignment corrected automatically. The unit stepped through without resistance. The second unit approached from the south. The third and fourth were now visible at extreme distance. 4 points, nearly perfect square. The compound detonated underground. Not an explosion, a structural collapse. One quadrant of the core imploded inward. The pulse shattered into chaotic vibration.
The black column above ground cracked violently, fragments tearing off and dissolving. The first unit staggered mid-step. It seemed flared open along its torso, vertical mouth splitting wide. A sound emerged, not a scream, a feedback loop, all the harvested voices layered at once. The second unit faltered. The third and fourth slowed abruptly. The geometry destabilized because the center was no longer balanced. The ground beneath the crater split, not upward, sideways. The concrete cap fractured unevenly. One entire edge sank several feet lower than the rest. Asymmetry forced downward pressure. The anchor convulsed. And then, something unexpected happened. The units began turning, not toward the crater, away from it, retreating, because without a stable center, they could not anchor. They were extensions without command hierarchy, limbs without a brain. The first unit attempted to step again. Its legs collapsed inward, structure folding into itself, seams splitting uncontrolled. It imploded silently. The second unit followed seconds later. Third and fourth faltered at distance, their silhouettes breaking apart like collapsing scaffolding. Each disintegrated into dense particulate mass that sank into soil and vanished. No explosion, no fire, just structural failure. The pulse beneath the crater diminished, not gone, weaker, uneven, damaged, but still present. The anchor hadn't died. It had been crippled, off balance, incomplete, unable to coordinate extensions. For now. Night fell over Turner Ranch again. The crater sat fractured, one side sunken, concrete broken unevenly, deliberately ugly, deliberately unstable. No perfect shapes remained, no clean edges, no balance. And for the first time since this began,
The air felt neutral, not pressurized, not measuring, just empty. But deep below, the faintest vibration persisted, irregular, arrhythmic, alive. They called it containment. They called it success. But as I stood at the edge of the fractured crater, I understood something they didn't. We hadn't destroyed it. We had taught it something new. It now knew what broke it. Imbalance, hierarchy disruption, asymmetry. And it would adapt again. Because the Earth itself, on a planetary scale, is round, symmetrical, balanced around a core. And somewhere beneath us, the anchor still existed. Learning.
Part 10, The Center of the World. They never rebuilt Turner Ranch. They couldn't. Not because the land was poisoned, not because it was unstable, but because every attempt to redraw property lines, fences, or road access created patterns. And patterns were no longer harmless. The crater remained. Not sealed this time, not capped in clean circles. They left it fractured. Jagged concrete slabs angled downward into the earth like broken teeth. No symmetry, no balance, no hierarchy. An intentional wound, permanent. Armed patrols rotated irregularly. Routes changed daily. Shifts staggered at uneven intervals. Even the guard towers were placed at offset distances. Human behavior became deliberately messy because we finally understood something simple. Order is a resource, and something beneath us feeds on it. Months passed. No new units emerged. No spontaneous collapses in suburban backyards. No drivers dying in aligned traffic lanes. Casualties plateaued. Official reports labeled it a contained anomaly. Privately, it was designated a dormant structural intelligence. They studied the residual energy under the crater with angled seismic arrays. Readings showed density still present. Condensed. Damaged, but not inert. When the wind blew across the fractured rim at night, he produced a low hum. Irregular. Broken. But sometimes, if you stood in the right place, you could feel a pattern trying to reform. Not visually, physically. A faint pressure in your sternum. A subtle pull toward the center. I felt it more than most. Maybe because it had nearly opened me. Maybe because it had already mapped my internal symmetry once. 3 months after convergence, something changed. Not at Turner Ranch. At sea. A cargo vessel stalled in the Gulf of Mexico. No explosion. No distress call beyond engine failure. Satellite images showed the ship adrift, almost perfectly centered between 3 offshore platforms arranged in a triangle. Crew members were found collapsed across decks, chest opened cleanly. The platform spacing hadn't changed in years, but ocean currents had shifted the ship into alignment. The event was small compared to Turner. Quiet. Contained. But it proved something critical. The anchor didn't need to expand outward from one crater. It only needed balance somewhere. Anywhere. Geometry exists everywhere. Global analysts began mapping infrastructure. Bridges. Wind farms. Oil rigs.
Satellite constellations. City blocks. The modern world is a grid. We worship symmetry. We build in repetition. We space evenly. We align. The realization spread slowly and then all at once. Turner Ranch had been an emergence point, not the origin. The core beneath it had condensed because of livestock distribution, fence spacing, water trough placement, barn geometry. But nothing about it suggested it was unique to that soil. It had responded to conditions, and those conditions exist worldwide. I was flown to Washington for a briefing, not because I was important, because I had felt the seam begin, because I could recognize the pressure before instruments did. In a windowless room, analysts displayed a projection of Earth, latitude and longitude lines forming a perfect grid, cities glowing like nodes, transportation arteries stretching in symmetry. "We can't redesign the planet," someone said quietly. "No," I answered, "but we can disrupt its balance." They thought I meant infrastructure. I didn't. 2 weeks later, I stood alone at the edge of the crater again. They allowed it, supervised, but distant. I stepped carefully down the fractured concrete, toward the uneven drop, toward the place where the drill had broken the core. The air was still, no hum, no pressure. For a moment, I thought maybe it truly was dormant. Then I felt it, not pulling, listening. The density beneath the earth shifted slightly, not upward, not aggressive, aware. It recognized proximity, recognized pattern memory. I closed my eyes, stood with my feet deliberately uneven, shoulders angled, arms asymmetrical, breathing irregular, and still, the faintest line of heat traced my sternum. Not opening, not yet. Testing, measuring, waiting for alignment. That's when I understood the final truth. It doesn't need cattle. It doesn't need roads. It doesn't even need cities. It needs us. Human bodies are symmetrical by design, bilateral, balanced. Even alone, standing upright, we are a vertical axis. 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 central seam. We are geometry. When we gather, we amplify it. When we build, we externalize it. The entity isn't hunting livestock. It isn't hunting towns. It is harvesting structure itself. And humans are its most efficient structural resource. The Gulf incident wasn't isolated. A wind farm in Kansas experienced a silent collapse. 3 turbines positioned equidistant across a ridge.
Maintenance crew between them, all dead within seconds. A satellite cluster drifted into near-perfect equilateral spacing during orbit correction. Ground control technicians monitoring the formation collapsed simultaneously across 3 continents. Distance no longer mattered. Hierarchy did. Symmetry across systems. The anchor under Turner was only 1 node, damaged, but connected. Because once a structure like that learns planetary geometry, it doesn't stay local. The solution proposed was radical. Not weapons, not drilling, not explosives. Global asymmetry, intentional disorder in infrastructure expansion, irregular city planning, offset satellite spacing, randomized road design algorithms, breaking the grid slowly over decades. But here's the problem. Efficiency depends on symmetry, power grids, traffic flow, architecture. We are optimized for order. To survive this, we must become inefficient, messy, uneven, imperfect, and humans resist that instinctively. The last recorded seismic reading from Turner Ranch spiked briefly last night. Not strong, not rising, but clean. One clear pulse, followed by silence. Not irregular, not broken, clean, balanced. Somewhere on Earth, a formation aligned perfectly enough to feed it. Not enough to rise, but enough to remind us it's still here. Beneath Texas, beneath oceans, beneath the mathematics of our cities. Learning, adapting, waiting for a moment when our need for order outweighs our fear. If you're listening to this, right now, look at the room around you. Are the walls parallel? Are the lights evenly spaced? Are you sitting centered between two objects? Is there someone directly across from you? Shift, move slightly, break the line, stand uneven, because the thing beneath us doesn't roar, it doesn't chase, it doesn't howl in the dark. It waits for balance, and when balance is perfect, it opens you quietly, cleanly, from the center outward, like it always intended. The crater at Turner Ranch remains fractured, deliberately ugly, a scar in the earth, a reminder. But the world itself is round, symmetrical, balanced on a core we barely understand. And somewhere deep beneath that, something has learned the shape of us. It doesn't need to rush. It has time. All it needs is for us to stand still, perfectly aligned, for just a moment.